Kia ora, Rob.
Kia ora.
Marcel.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Nadine. Kia ora, Waverley. There's a few of us that have just jumped off a previous Zoom, so we might be a few still coming on. Kia ora, Manu, Generous.
Thank you for your help. Oh, kia ora, Hayley. My mate, kia ora. Oh, kia ora. Nicole, Chris, Pina Korua.
Well, kia ora, Mahuru.
Tēnā koe, Naomi.
Kia ora, Hena.
Kia ora, Naomi.
I need to turn off my notifications somehow.
Kei konei koe, Alex.
Yeah.
Koe nei ahau, engari invisible.
Ka pai. We'll just give ourselves maybe another minute or two before we get started. Kia ora, Jade.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Hi. Ka pai. O Nadine, tira pia me timata.
Ai, kia ora. Ai.
Tēnā koutou. Tuatahi me karakia tātou, hei timata i tā tātou nei hui, no reira mi noi. Manawa mai te Māori nuku, manawa mai te Māori rangi, ko te Māori ke au, he Māori tipua, ka pakaru mai te pō, te mai te Māori, haumi e hui e, tāe ki e. Ngā mihi o te tauhou Māori kia tātou katoa, matariki hunga nui, matariki ahunga nui, te mātatahi o te tauhou Māori. Whiruko mai I te rangi, hei whetū taki aho, hei whetū korako, ngā mata o te ariki, matariki e rere nei. Manawatia te tauhou kia tātou katoa. Tēnā koutou, ngā tini whetū, ngā piata mai rā mai ngā hauē whā. Ahakoa I runga I te Zoom. Tēnei au, he urina no Raukawa, ki te kauparo o Pātatere, e mehe ana kia koutou katoa, kua tai mai. Ki te wānanga, e pāna ki ngā kaupapa rangahau, o ki ngā pūtea rangahau, mō te ngā mea te taura, me te pūtea rangahau te aho. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, it's awesome to see you. My Zoom screen has just gone to an extra page, which is always exciting. It means we've got lots of people on the screen. So fantastic to see you all. Just a few housekeeping things before I get into what we're doing. If you could mute your microphones. Matua koinui, kauimua. Yep. Can you just mute your microphone? Aroha mai. Ka pai. And we all know how to use Zoom pretty well nowadays, unfortunately. But just to get an indication, because there are a few of us and there might be lots of pātai coming, if it's snowing in your area, can you raise your hand using the reaction button? For those of you who know how to use the reaction, if it's snowing, can I get a thumbs up reaction?
Yeah.
Or kia ora, Ruby. Taupo. Okay. Rob, kia ora rā. If it's warm where you are, can you give us a heart? Alex. Jade, ka pai. And if you're just keeping warm with your blankies and heaters, can you give us a paki reaction? Ka pai, tēnā koutou. Awesome to see you all know how to use those functions. Really excited to see you all. What we're going to do today is try and keep as much of the time available for you to ask your questions, for us just to wānanga about these funds. First of all, we'll just go around our team and do a quick introduction of who we are. And for time's sake, rather than do our proper full-blown whakawhanaungatanga, we might just ask you a few pātai and get you to respond using the chat functions and the reaction function so we can see who's who in the Zoom room. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about what the funds are that are available. We're wanting to do things a little bit differently with this round of funding to how it's been done in the past. So I'll hand over to Nadine to give us a bit of a kōrero about that. I've got a few kind of key pointers around applications that I think will help make for the strongest application in this EOI phase and moving into our full proposals. But we really want to leave the rest of the time over to you guys for pātai. So to start with, just for us to get a bit of a sense of who's here, can you just type into the chat function where you're zooming in from? So your location, where are you zooming in from around the motu? Give us a bit of an idea of our geographical spread. So you can just pop that in as we go. Wait, tamaki, whainga roa, no wonder you're warm. Haupo, waikato, whakatane. Hannah's upstairs, just in case. Manu atu, ka pai. Okay, the next pātai, so we can get a sense of who you're representing or what iwi hapu community that you're looking to work with or for or on behalf of. If you could just put in the iwi hapu community group that you're working with for this particular potential mahi. Manu's in his ute at Uawa. Kia ora. Kia ora rā, GNS toi tangata. Tēnā koutou, te runanga. Oh, you guys all type fast. Ngā kura iwi, ngā te mutunga, ngā te tama, tainui āwhiro, te tai rāwhiti. Ai, rawe. Rawe koutou. And the last pātai that I have is, do you have an idea of whether you are wanting to apply for the funding for Te Taura or Te Aho? And you can put unsure or question mark if you're unsure. So just, do you have an idea? Obviously this Zoom is designed for Te Taura, but we can get a bit of a sense of who's in the room. Unsure, Te Taura, ka pai. Understand more of both funds. Ka pai. Tēnā koutou. That's really useful. Feel free to use the chat function as we're talking if you've got questions as they pop up. We have got Alex who will keep an eye on that and keep Nadine and probably me more so in check in terms of what we're talking about. So what we'll do now is we'll just introduce our team before I hand over to Nadine to talk a little bit about the fund. As I said, I hail from Raukawa ki te Kaukaro Pātatere, Pūtāraru, born and bred, but live in Whakatane at the moment. And I'm really new to the Deep South challenge. Like this is week number 2, I think. So I'm here as a supporting kaitaka wainga alongside Nadine. I'm really excited. Really what I want to be doing is just supporting communities to do what they're already doing and to just get some money out there to be able to tautoko in the best way that we can. So that's me. I'll hand over to Alex, who is named Deep South Challenge. She just named herself the challenge.
Oh, kia ora everyone, ko Alex tōku ingoa, no ahi te reiri ahau, so don't hold that against me. But I moved to Aotearoa about 15 years ago and luckily, unluckily fell for a Ngāti Toa man. So now I live at Hongoeka Marae, just north of Porirua. But I'm here in my capacity as the communications advisor for the Deep South Challenge and supporting, just playing a backseat role, supporting Nadine and Naomi to get these funds off the ground. Nui te mihi kia koutou.
Hey, tēnā koe, Alex. Waverley, do you want to introduce yourself to the...
Yeah, sure. Kia ora everyone, ko Waverley tōku ingoa. I'm currently sitting in a very cold Hutt Valley. I am the Partnerships Director for the Deep South and work mainly in the Impacts and Implications program. I'm super keen and excited to have Naomi and Nadine on board our team now. So again, similar to Alex, I'm just sitting back and listening and yeah, really keen to hear about the two funds.
Ka pai. Kia ora, Waverley. I thought you said you were sitting in a very cold hut.
Yeah,
well, my house is quite old, yeah, so a little bit.
Ka pai. And I'll pass over to you, Nadine, and then you can carry on with your kōrero about that.
Yeah, kia ora. Well, huri noa i te motu ki ngā kānohi e mene mai ana i raro i te maru Zoom. Tēnā koutou katoa me ngā mihi ki a koe e hoa nau te karakia i tuku he uri ahau, ko Nadine Hura tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Hine me Ngāpuhi ki te tai tukurau. Engari, i nānei e noho ana ahau ki te upoko o te ika i raro i te maru o Whitireia maunga, nōku te whiwhi. Yeah, ko au te tahi o ngā kaitaka wainga. It's a huge privilege to work along such an awesome team. So thank you, Naomi and Alex and Waverley. And it's really, really awesome to see all of your faces here today. And thank you for taking the time to come. Just tautoko what Naomi has said, really keen to make this as useful as possible for you. So I will try to keep my kōrero brief. I wanted to just talk very briefly about Te Taura and Te Aho, and hopefully you have all had a chance to look at the website and to see our table of differences, what we perceive the likely differences to be. That's not a template, it's more of a guide. I was trying to think of a really appropriate analogy for Te Aho and Te Taura, but I was thinking of, like, I'm not a very nautical person. I was like, what kind of rope do you need to bring in, like a really big ship, you know, it's something, you know, quite involved and complex for Te Taura, whereas for Te Aho you might, you know, be weaving something a little bit more intricate. But at the same time, the unifying fact is the strength of that bind. So whatever it is that your project is, it is appropriate for the project and for the outcome and the goals that you have. So just to bear that in mind, it's not meant to be really hard and fast. That the point of the way that we've structured our engagement this time is to try and get a really good understanding for what it is that you and your communities need, and what do we need to do in order to be able to support you to do that. So that's just really to reiterate the importance of these hui and the opportunity that you have before the closing dates of both Te Taura, which is just July 15th, so that's not far away, and Te Aho, September 1st. So, so just a couple of notes on the process, which you've probably already picked up, but the reason that we're doing our process a little bit differently is to recognise that you are all really, really busy. We know that. I've been on the road visiting communities, and I know that filling out application forms for somebody else's sort of bucket of money, you've got to pitch it exactly right. And that can take a lot of time and resource. So we recognise that. So we've split our process into an EOI, expression of interest, and an RFP, a request for proposal. So the EOI, really think of it like a conversation. So that's your opportunity in plain English to really just describe to somebody who might not know anything about your project or your goals in a way that they would be able to understand it. And I'm not a scientist, so the goal would be for me to be able to understand it and to be able to convey that to the kahui, that the role of the kaitaka wainga is to be that go-between between the kahui on assessment and you, the community. So it's really important that EOI is able to convey in a way that's quite short. You know, the process shouldn't take you too long, between sort of 40 minutes to an hour we envisage. And we don't want you to go heaps into the detail, but we do need to know what the scope is. We want you to, and this is what Naomi is going to talk about in a little bit more detail in terms of the thread and the strength of that bind. Just a couple of admin notes. If after this hui and you've already put in an application, you would like to make some changes to your application, you have two options. One is that you can ask us to delete it on our side. We have a copy of it, so you won't lose anything, but we can delete it from our system and you can resubmit it. That would probably be our preference, but if it's just a little bit of additional information, not that we require letters of support or anything at this point, but we can add, I can receive an email with an attachment and add it to your application. And just before I hand over to Naomi, I just wanted to read out a really beautiful whakatauki that Ruia gave us when we were doing wānanga on the differences between these two funds. And it's actually on some of our documents, but I thought it'd be really beautiful to share it. It is ko tuia ki te aho rangahau kia mauai, whiria te taura mā tauranga kia ita. So with a thread of research to maintain, plait the rope of ancestral knowledge to tightly bind and sustain. And I think that really shows that even though the funds are different, the overall aims are really closely entwined. We understand that together we're all doing this work together, as we're really aiming for some connection and unity between and across all of the work that we're doing. I think I will leave it there, but yeah, I'm the kind of person that you can email. Just hit me with your emails if you need to have a conversation about some details. You can come to me in the first instance, and Naomi is here, of course, with more technical expertise. Kia ora.
Ai, tēnā koe, Nadine. Thank you for that. The other thing we should add is that there is the FAQ section on the website. Alex, if you can chuck that up into the chat function. We're adding to those as we go. So as we get questions from potential applicants, we're kind of trying to answer those as we go. So just keep kind of rechecking those. If you have questions that pop up, they may already be answered in that section there. You can have a look as well. I should also say that we have got apologies from our kāhui members who aren't able to be with us today, but it is the kāhui that makes the final decision on our application. So Nadine and I and Alex, we're here to try and help you put in the best application that you can to kind of refine your ideas, to help support with some of the articulation of what it is you want to say. We are here to be able to come and visit with communities, particularly for the Te Taura Fund. Excuse me, just a dog in the background. To be able to help with communities if they have some thinking, you know, if they think, yeah, we want to do something on climate change, but we're not too sure about how, what that might look like, what that can look like. We are really here to try and support with as much as, you know, two people can do. So we are happy to come and visit communities and visit institutions as we can, or do independent Zooms from these webinars. What I wanted to touch on before I throw it to the floor is really, I guess, some key things that I have seen sitting on a number of assessment panels for funding and for proposals, and some things that I think would really help make applications the strongest. And just some things I think to consider when we're working with our whānau hapu and iwi and for ourselves, knowing, as Nadine said, we're all extremely busy and wear usually multiple hats. Given that we're talking about Te Taura, we're talking about Te Aho, these kind of strands, one of the key things in your EOI and in your full proposal is to make sure that every part of your application is connected to each other with some kind of connecting strand from start to finish. So your kaupapa should connect with your goals, should connect with how you propose to do the work, should connect with the team that you're putting forward to do the work, should connect with the amount of money that you are indicating that you may need. So that's really important. It kind of speaks to the scope of what it is that you're wanting to do, but it also speaks to a really clear line of sight around this is the issue, or this is the potential solution that we want to look at, and this is how we're going to track doing it. That's probably one of the really key parts of this process, is that you have clear line of sight through the whole process. So for example, that means if you're doing or you're proposing a kaupapa rangahau that is working with rangatahi, that you have rangatahi built into every stage of your proposal, right? And we've seen, and I can say it here, usually in lots of non-Māori applications, there's work that says we're working with rangatahi, and then there's nothing about talking to rangatahi, it's all talking at. So making sure that your kaupapa connects with your methods, your methodology, but also with your research team. So if you're doing work with rangatahi, my advice is think about how you build that into the actual research design, so the actual design of your project as well. So having that clear line of sight, if you're talking about an action research project, then make sure that that's built the whole way through. If you're using a kaupapa Māori approach, make sure that that is built the whole way through. The other thing that's really important in terms of this particular fund, it is a research fund, and whilst we're trying to push and extend the boundaries of how we understand research and to really challenge the kind of Western definitions of research that have existed, what we do need you to demonstrate is that there will be some kind of knowledge generation through the process. So we know as Māori, as iwi and hapu, that we gain knowledge in a whole range of different, innovative, unique and really important ways, through the land, our wairua, from our maramataka, all of those different ways. So those are knowledge generation. Implementation of a project is a form of knowledge generation, but you need to demonstrate how that knowledge is going to be brought together, whether that's through wānanga, whether that's through the outputs that you're using, which we really encourage you to be innovative or to think differently about outputs. What's going to be the most impactful for you and your community? It is not usually, or may not be, a report, just saying, and we're really open to thinking about what those outputs might look like. And the other thing that I've seen is that a lot of us are used to doing things, a lot of things on a really, not a lot of pūtea, with not a lot of resource. So just be a little bit careful about over-promising. We tend to say, yep, we can do all of this with this tiny little amount. What we want to see is that what you're proposing is achievable, that it's manageable and sustainable. We don't want to be burning our communities out. So making sure that you're creating a project that has that in mind. Even though we know probably we all overachieve and tend to over-deliver in terms of what we're working with. Really important, because you don't have a lot of words in your EOI, that you get your elevator pitch right. So in terms of what you're doing, if you had 10 floors with somebody who you don't know and you had to say what the project is, that's the kind of pitch we want in terms of thinking about what your kaupapa is. You don't need to buy into having to have all of the words, the climate adaptation, resilience, te mea, te mea, te mea. It's okay to be really kind of clear, simple about what it is that you are wanting to do. Noting that obviously it's a climate change fund. I think that's all, but I'm just going to jump into the questions. We've got one from Manu. Do you anticipate recommending facilitating research or organisation connections based on the focus of EOIs prior to the RFP being submitted? Hapai, or is that up to you? Really good question. So one of the things we put in the EOI is if you're going to, particularly for Te Taura, have collaborations, or you would like to work in a more collaborative way, or you may have some specific needs, some specific expertise, whether that's a science expertise or whether that's something else. In the EOI stage, if you don't already know who those people might be, then we can support trying to find those connections or potentially making connections between different projects if that's needed. So you don't have to have all of your collaborations and partnerships pinned down at the EOI stage. You can say, look, we're having a conversation with this organisation or with this group, or we're really keen to, or we need a particular, we would like to include in our full proposal some expertise on climate modelling, for example, and then we can support you to find those for the full RFP, again, within the kind of capacity limits that we have. Nadine, do you want to add anything to that?
No, tautoko that. I think that's, that's covered it, I think. We're here to just email us, and I think that makes sense to do that between the EOI, well, before the EOI, if that's possible, but it may not be possible for Te Taura. So that could definitely happen during the RFP stage, yeah.
And Hayley has just posted a question as well. Is specific climate language required in the EOI? Nadine, do you want to field that?
Yes, yeah, we've been talking about plain language. No, we encourage you to take a mātauranga Māori approach to the language of climate change. So our understanding of te taiao within our lived lives. Having said that, I think there is some guidance around making sure, as Naomi mentioned, that the connection between the impact of the changes that whānau or communities might be experiencing is evident in the application. So I think it's a bit of a balance. Naomi, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important that the kaupapa that you're looking at is going to fill a need for the community that you're working with in relation to climate change, whether that's climate justice, whether that's looking at, and I think it's really important, what we're trying to push is that a lot of what our communities do around te reo Māori, around well-being, around maramataka, those are all things that are building resilient communities in relationship to some of the impacts that our communities are likely to feel. There's lots of discussion around climate change as being just another form of colonization. So we know how to respond in those kinds of ways and how to engage with those kinds of discourses. So I don't think you need to kind of say, yes, this is, we're going to do climate modeling. A lot of people say, well, do we have to do a particular kind of climate science? You don't. If that's what you want to do, then awesome. But if there is something else that you think is going to build the needs and fill the needs and make impact in the communities that you're working with in relation to some of the impacts and causes of climate change, then would really encourage you to kind of engage in this process. So we're opening to questions now, if you can figure that out. So feel free to raise your hand if you want, and we can go around, but there are a couple more questions that have come through in the chat function. So kia ora, Alex, does the funding have more of a community focus, or is it of equal value to work with Māori trusts and incorporations? Kia koe, Nadine.
Yeah, I think that it really depends who is driving the project, and who will benefit from the project. So working with Māori trusts and incorporations is not out of scope. It really will depend much more on what the outcomes will be. So we are prioritizing research that will obviously benefit Māori communities, and we want to see exactly how that's going to play out. So yes, and yes, Manu, in regards to having a really broad scope, we do. That's the exciting thing about this fund. So yeah, do you want to say any more about the Māori trusts and incorporations? Because this is,
I think probably all I would say is that it's really important to understand we have diverse range of communities as Māori, and that the impacts of changes in our taiao impact us in a whole range of different ways. If I think about our whānau on the East Coast, where they are the majority landowners, what does that mean for them in terms of, the land that they own or what they might do in trusts? Think about some of the economic ventures that our incorporations are involved in, then there will be impacts on that. So again, there needs to be a really clear link to what some of the issues may be for that group, whether it's a community focus, whether it's on trusts and incorporations. We know in one of the areas that we've identified as around things like just transition, it's a hard thing to say all in one, just transitions. So, thinking about if we're going to move away from forestry, for example, there are a lot of our own people employed in those industries. And what does it mean? They're not necessarily going to be the ones who gain employment in some of the new climate responsive type of economies. So all of those kinds of kaupapa and not pigeonholing to only those kinds of kaupapa are really important to our kind of overall response as te iwi Māori. So really keen to encourage as kind of diverse range of applications as we can get. And Alex has just put in a little link to some of the areas that the kāhui has identified as potential priority areas. They tend to span quite a lot of different kaupapa, so you can look at those and that may help, particularly in terms of some of the languaging or framing that you may wish to draw on as well. Okay. So I'll throw it out to the Zoom. Are there more pātai? If you can just maybe raise your hand.
If there's no questions out there, we can go through some of the FAQs that have come in the last couple of weeks, if that would be helpful. Some of these questions I think are probably relevant as you're working on your EOIs. We've been asked if you need to know the exact cost of your project, but we don't at this stage, but it would be really good for you to have in mind a breakdown of at least to have in mind what you think that you will need funding for, and then estimate it within your own team how much you're going to need, so that when it comes to the RFP stage, this is what we've been talking about, making sure that the scope is correct, is achievable for your aims. We've got a question, co-funding in kind. It's not required, but depending on, I mean, it's great if it shows that there's partnership and intricacy that's ideal. If it strengthens the project, we would probably expect to see that more so within Te Taura, where it's a little bit more complex, but it's by no means a requirement.
Kia ora Nadine. Oh, Mahuru, did you have a pātai?
Oh, so I don't know.
Ora. I was just wondering about using like a modern technology, things like apps as an output. Is that seen as a valid output or one of?
Yes.
Yeah, anything that you think is going to have impact in the communities, and then obviously that's going to determine your kind of budget and the scope of your project as well. But definitely, if that's going to be most impactful, then we would encourage you to look at those kinds of technologies. As well as kind of the opposite, I guess we've had questions around whether or not things like waiata compositions or mahi whakairo or things like that would be a valid output, and we would really encourage you to kind of look at the ways in which we transmit knowledge that isn't necessarily on pen and paper. Not to say you can't do that, but that might again be a little bit more impactful in your communities and have that intergenerational spread and effect. Rob's asked a question in the chat. If an application was successful, what would be the time frame? When would you receive the money and when do you need to spend it? So can I throw that to you, Nadine, in terms of process?
Yeah, so depending on which fund it is for, so Te Taura, obviously contracting for Te Taura would begin as soon as possible after the RFPs, which I believe is in August. So you would be, and we've allowed quite a long time frame for the contracting because in our experience, it does take a little bit of time. So you could expect to start your projects for Te Taura towards the end of the year or the beginning of next year. And we need them to be finished and completely done by February 2024. That's for all projects actually. In terms of te aho, so the question is, when would you need to spend it by? So February 2024 is the end date, and your time to receive the funding depends on how long it takes to get the contracting underway. So for te aho, you could be starting your projects starts and te aho closes in September. We'd expect those projects hopefully to be starting early next year as well. So yeah, and the timelines are there on the website that's linked to there. So is that okay?
Kia ora, yep, thank you.
Kia ora. Another couple of questions. Kia ora, Jade, that's a really good pātai around early applications, whether it's advantageous to put an early application in and get some feedback. Either way, if you wanted to do it that way, or if you just want to have a conversation with Nadine or I, we can give you some feedback kind of via Zoom or via email if you didn't want to put in a full EOI. We're meeting with our kāhui and updating them quite regularly, so we are getting a steer from them in terms of the kinds of things that they may be looking for. So if you want to put an EOI in early, then that's fine, and then we can enable you to kind of rework that as the deadline approaches. Or if you just want to do something slightly less formal, we can have those conversations. Do you want to add to that, Nadine?
No, that's okay. I was just thinking there was another question here around, oh yeah. I think I would encourage you to have a conversation with us and to put in your application early and let us know that the research partners are that you're still finalising that, because that's something that that will really come into play during the RFP stage. So I would encourage you to put it in as soon as you're able, but no stress, you know, it's just so that we can help give you feedback on we're not giving feedback on all the applications. What we're doing is having a look at them and making sure that we understand it, and that those aspects that Naomi has talked about, that there's clear line of sight, and that it's the best application that you can put forward, to maximise the understanding that the kāhui have when they sit down in a room and begin to discuss it, that all the applications are being assessed on their best merits. So that's the goal. So yeah.
Another couple of questions coming through. Are there particular things the funding can't be spent on?
Yeah. So this is something that we need to work on for our RFP stage, and we will do that. We're going to work on some really good guidelines so that people are really aware of what their budgets can cover and what can't be paid for. I imagine that there are some infrastructure things, some you know, there'll be some things that you would expect that will be out of scope, but we're really open-minded. Again, the process will be about making sure that you're well equipped to undertake the research and do the work. So but within that, you'll need some guidelines. So just bear with us on that. We will give you some more information when it comes time for the RFP. We're hopefully looking to be able to give you a really good steer about how you could build your projects, making sure that you can appropriately resource all aspects of it, and those parts that you can't, then that the fund is not intended to support, then maybe there are other partners in other ways. So the goal will be to get the research off the ground and to see it supported all the way through.
Alex, have you got something to add to that part?
Hi, excuse me. Just that one thing we haven't made clear, because it really depends on the nature of your research, but if you have research about which we might be able to access relevant climate data, for example, flooding data in particular, or hydrology data, or to some extent climate projections, then we will be able to make extra funding available to translate that data for you in a meaningful way. That is very much dependent on our capacity and on your specific needs, but just to be aware that, because sometimes that climate data factor can be a very expensive factor and a suck on research budgets, but if you can identify that really early on, then we'll be able to unpack that a little bit at our end and understand how much we can access, and whether we can do that for you on top of your research budget. Kia ora.
And a really good question from Tai is, do we anticipate heavy subscription, and what's the total funding pool and how many people are we funding?
So the total pool of funding that we have available is not enough, is the short answer, and we would like to increase that pool, but for the moment it is a limited budget, and these are the discussions that the kāhui have already been having and will continue to have as the applications come in, because of course the answer, it really depends. To answer your question, we don't have any specific ranked criteria at this stage. We want to invite the research to come in, and this is why we've done it in two steps. So to recognise that we don't want to put you to a whole lot of work if it's not going to be funded. So once we have the EOIs in, that will give us a really good idea of what the projects are out there, and the geographic spread may be one of the things that we look at. But equally, we are looking at. I know that the kāhui is interested in the needs and the quality of the work. When I say quality, I mean the mātauranga Māori that's embedded within it, and so all we can sort of say at this stage is put your best application in, and if you have multiple applications, well, you might not have multiple, but you might have a couple and you're not sure which. That would be the time for you to have a conversation with us about whether or not you put in one application and split it into 2 parts or 3 parts, or whether they are in fact distinct projects. So that's another question that's come up in this context of which one should I put in, because how are they going to be assessed against each other? And that's something that we're not entirely able to say just yet. So we just encourage you to put your best EOI in, and we'll go from there. And by the time we get to the RFP stage, we would hope that we will have a better idea about the subscription, as you say, because it also depends too on what we can do to spread that resource out and support as many projects as we possibly can. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I've got some other things to say around engagement, but I'll pass over to you, Naomi, because that's partly for you too.
Right. What I would just add to that is that given the amount of interest we've had, I would suggest that there's going to be quite a large number of EOIs that come in for both funds. So that's why we want to make sure that we can support you to put the best application forward as well. Are there any more pātai?
I would like to add something there actually, which is that even though it's an awkward process to go through, if there's certainly no guarantee of funding because the interest is so high, but the Deep South Challenge is only funded until 2024, and at that point it's not very clear who will take over the responsibility for driving adaptation and adaptation research, but it's likely to be the Climate Commission, which will take over responsibility for adaptation. And it's really important that that the Climate Commission and that MB and that those large funders of research understand that the thirst, the need and the readiness for research is far greater than the funding they're making available. They've often run the argument that, well, there's no capacity, but we know that that's not true. It's because their processes don't suit communities. So we want to make a strong argument back to our funders that that communities are ready, willing and able to do adaptation research and implementation now. And the more EOIs we get, the more able we are to make that case.
That's true.
Alex. Just looking around. Nadine, did you want to say something more about engagement?
Well, just that, so one of the questions that we've had a number of times is whether or not the fund will support the development of a climate change strategy, because there are a lot of communities out there who know that they need to get started, but doing a risk assessment or working through their priorities is something that they actually need help with, and whānau are quite interested in having conversations with other iwi who have developed climate change strategies. And we've recognised that there could be a need for and a desire for wānanga among communities to share the knowledge that they already have and to have the opportunity to hear from other iwi about what responses and what actions they're taking or what technologies they have or are looking at, and just a chance to share expertise. So we're aware that if applications come in like that, and so if we weren't able to fund all of the projects, we've got at the back of our mind that we might be able to fund other things so it wouldn't be a no, your project didn't get over. It might be, how can we deliver to certain aspects so that the fire stays alive, and so that you can carry on and keep doing your work. So that's something that we've got in the back of our minds. So that's engagement sits entirely separate of this putia. So instead of going to climate change conferences and mainstream institutions and conferences and stuff, we're looking at the idea of wānanga or opportunities for knowledge exchange that come from a request from communities for responding to the needs that they have, their knowledge needs. So just something to have in the back of your mind.
Kia ora. Right, I'm going to throw out one more time if there are any more pātai. If anyone wants to wānanga on their research idea. Whole group of experts sitting here.
Let's go. Don't be shy.
I might throw something in there. Kia ora te whānau. Put my mic down, might be a bit easier to hear. So work at Niwa as part of the Māori environmental research team here, and have been working with a community out in Whaingaroa, where I'm from. They're at the harbour entrance on a block of whenua ko te kōpua, and it's subject to coastal hazards, coastal erosion, coastal flooding. And the Waikato Regional Council have just put out their policy statement for the coastal management, I suppose, and Waikato District Council as well has just put out its chapter on hazard management. So there's quite a few documents that are being released that are impacting how whānau can utilise their whenua within a changing climate and under hazards. And so there's a real need for our whānau to develop some sort of adaptive management plan so that they can have mana motuhake and tino rangatiratanga over how they want to utilise their land into the future. So we're looking to, and we kind of haven't quite figured out the who's and the how's yet, but Waikato Regional Council are quite keen to be involved, Waikato District Council are quite keen to be involved, Niwa's quite keen to involved, but the whānau are keen to lead this piece of work where they can basically exercise their mana motuhake and their ability to self-determine how they're going to utilise their whenua, because at the moment it's got so many planning provisions over it that they'll never be able to do anything with their whenua into the future. I could do that. But yeah, just wondering whether or not the whānau are thinking whether or not what strand of the funding I suppose they go into, whether they make it this multidisciplinary collaborative kaupapa with all those entities that should be supporting adaptive management but really aren't at the moment, or whether they should just kokiri their own kaupapa and then present it to those entities. So yeah, just wondering kind of which pathway to go down at the moment. That's a good question.
Hey, kia ora tā Sal. I mean, your whānau have a very strong history of mana motuhake over te kōpua, and so I think drawing from that in terms of adaptive management and climate change would be such an incredible kaupapa to see. There's a few things just to think about. Again, Te Taura enables a little bit more in terms of that collaborative approach, but we do want it to be led by whānau, by Māori researchers, kaupapa Māori, and so kind of really determining how those other entities engage with you in that process. The other thing that we have had a question about, I think it's in our FAQs, is around council engagement and whether this fund will fund council's role. One of the things that we've said is that if councils should be doing this work anyway, that their contribution should really be in kind. Again, we can work through the detail of those kinds of things in the RFP stage. But there is the opportunity to look at putting into Te Taura, and then if whānau change their mind, they want something that's kind of more discreet for them and not necessarily have to engage with those other parties, then they could switch into Te Aho. Is that correct, Nadine, in terms of kind of really being able to look at both? It really does, again, it depends on the scope, depends on the kind of size of the project and how much involvement you want those other parties to have. But our biggest kind of priority is to ensure that our communities are doing research that is safe for them and determined by them in terms of who is involved and how their involvement looks. So we're not looking at collaboration as an equal kind of, this party has to have this amount and this party and this party. It is designed and led by whānau, and however you want those groups to come in, then kei a koutou te mana. So.
Yeah, sorry, you go.
No, I was just saying, Joyce, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think probably at this stage, because it's only 2 weeks before Te Taura closes, and there is no downside because you can apply for Te Taura, and if it's not the right fit, you can apply, we can switch it over to the other fund. But I guess it's really a case, what we've been saying is to whānau to look at the outcomes, those who can't decide which fund to apply for, and to work out how you're best going to achieve those outcomes. And it might be that Te Aho, even though it's a slightly smaller fund, I think the maximum project cost is up to 150,000, but there's still quite a lot. So I guess it's the level of impact that you can have within your budget, and whether or not you're going to be able to achieve what you need to achieve within Te Aho. Otherwise, Te Taura with a longer time frame and more partners might be the better fund, but it's probably going to be driven at the end of the day by what it is that you want to achieve and when you want to achieve it, and what those outcomes look like, which fund you will ultimately fall under. It should be an alignment issue rather than like a pitching. It should feel like this is where we naturally belong, because this is what we're trying to achieve, and it fits naturally in Te Taura, rather than trying to change the project outcomes to fit Te Taura or vice versa.
Kia ora. Right, any final pātai? Kia ora Tai. Building of Māori communities, entities and climate change. Absolutely, that would fit. Yes. Again, we can have a more in-depth kōrero with you if you would like, around which fund or where that might fit. So, Alex, can I just get you to put our contact details in the chat function, just in case people don't have them? They are on the website. Maybe only Nadine's at this stage, maybe not mine. So sorry, Nadine, you might get the brunt of all of the calls as well.
It's just asking, Tai, is that were you looking at capability building across the motu, or just with a particular community?
Just unmute myself, actually, start a video too. Kia ora koutou. It would be with a particular community, so with Pahuera in the Northern Hawke's Bay area.
Awesome.
But it's not to say that there's not shared learnings that could be adopted nationwide. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Okay, cool. So that sounds like a Te Aho project, but as you say, with learning that will be valuable for the whole country. So
yeah, and I did wonder that, because it would be in partnership with Ag Research, who I work for, and I guess partnering with individuals within Pahuera to build their capability. But if they're working with a CRI, climate scientists within a CRI, is that then fit in Te Taura or Te Aho? But we can take this offline. We'll get in touch early next week once I figure out what we're doing on our side first.
Yeah, that'd be great. And think too about the how the knowledge that you gain through the process of your research can be shared. Like, we really want to see at the EOI phase what it's going to look like when it hits the ground. Like, that's the exciting part. The moimoia, what is it that you visualize coming from this is definitely what the kāhui want to be able to see during the application, as well as the knowledge generation itself. So both aspects of that.
Kia ora, ka pai, thank you.
Oh,
karawe koutou. Well, that brings us really to the end of the session. If you do have more questions, or they come up, which they usually do when you're filling in the EOI form itself or starting to work through the detail, please do reach out to us, and we will make some time to talk with you and work through that process. Really excited to see all of you on here. Again, just affirms that as iwi Māori, we are working in this space, we're leading in this space, and that it is really important for us to fund projects that are going to be impactful in our communities and that are serving our community needs, serving the needs of our whānau and our whenua, and yeah, just want to mihi to you all for the work that I know you're all already doing. I think that's really important. We're not usually we don't fund, people who aren't already doing amazing things, not just as researchers, but as iwi members, as hapu members, as marae members, as community members and activists and writers and all of the amazing things that, kapahaka performers and all of the amazingness that we tend to encompass and knit together or weave together in our own lived experiences. So, neira te mihi nunui kia koutou katoa. Thank you for taking the time today for this webinar. Please keep in touch. You're welcome to come to the other webinars, which we have going on next Tuesday and the following Tuesday. If you do have more questions, not confined to just one, but just really want to thank you all for your time and wish you the best in your applications. I'm looking forward to seeing them coming through and to having some more conversations, some more climate kōrero around this. So kia ora, Sean, you've just hit us right as we're closing. So would you like to say anything as our kahui member?
Sounds like you've summed it up all nicely. So.
Thank you for joining us. The last thing I did want to say, which I forgot, terrible facilitator, is that this was recording. So if you don't, well, could you let us know if you mind if we share the recording with others who are interested in the webinar but may have not been able to come? Is anyone completely against that? Okay, kapai. I apologise, I should have said that at the beginning, but I think when you sign in, it says it's recording, so kia ora. Me and technology is not the best. Tēnā koutou, kia pai te rangi. I'll just close our hui with karakia before we log out. Nō reira, he mihi anō tēnei kia koutou. Kia tātou katoa. Unuhia ki te urutapu nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa ki te ara takatū, koe ara e rongo, whakairi ake ki runga, kia tīna, haume e, hui e, tāi ki e. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ka kite. Kia ora, Sean.
Kia ora. I just got out of my AGM.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Yeah, a bit of a bummer. I missed it.